Have you ever wondered what happens when a nation's entire fortune just disappears into the sea? I mean, we're talking about some of the most powerful naval fleets of their time sailing right over the horizon and then just gone, never seen again. And in one case, they weren't just lost, they were actively erased from history.
You have to understand, these weren't just ships. They were carrying the ambitions of emperors and the wealth of entire empires. And then, poof, they vanished. All that's left are ghost stories, legends, and these massive, gaping holes in the story of our world. And that, right there, is the real question at the heart of our story today. Because how these fleets disappeared tells two completely different tales about power, ambition, and the forces that can bring even the mightiest empire to its knees. So, we're going to dive into two of the most significant never-returned events in all of maritime history. One from the east and one from the west. Now, their stories are separated by centuries, but you'll see how their fates echo each other in some really fascinating ways. On one side, we've got the colossal treasure fleet of Ming Dynasty China. I'm talking a spectacle of naval power the world literally wouldn't see again for hundreds of years. And on the other side, the 1715 Spanish treasure fleet, this desperate convoy carrying the financial salvation of a fading European superpower. Okay, so let's get into this because you really can't understand why they vanished until you understand why they sailed in the first place. And their missions, well, they could not have been more different. It was a classic showdown, raw survival versus absolute, undeniable dominance. You see, the Spanish mission was born from pure desperation. The empire was bankrupt after a huge, costly war, so this 1715 fleet was their lifeline, just packed with years of gold and silver from the Americas, all meant to rescue the entire economy. But the Ming mission? Totally different. It wasn't about need at all. It was about projecting power. The young emperor wanted to completely awe foreign kingdoms to make it crystal clear to everyone that China was the center of the universe. And when we talk about Ming power, the scale is just, well, it's staggering. A single voyage under Admiral Zheng He had almost 28,000 men. That's not a fleet, you guys. That is a literal floating city, filled with soldiers and diplomats and doctors, all sailing to show off the glory of the Ming. And right here is where the scale becomes truly mind-boggling. Look at this chart. It shows the insane technological gap. Decades before Columbus ever sailed, Zheng He's treasure ships were absolute giants. At around 400 feet long, they made Columbus's Santa Maria look like a little lifeboat. I mean, you could have practically parked it on the deck. This wasn't just a big fleet, it was, hands down, the most advanced naval force on the entire planet at the time. So we have these two epic fleets, right? Two totally different missions. And this is where their stories just split in the most dramatic way possible. One met a sudden, incredibly violent end. The other was quietly and deliberately erased from history by its own people. For the Spanish, the end came with wind and water and fury. They took this huge gamble, leaving Havana in late July, smack in the middle of hurricane season. Their treasury was just so empty, they felt they couldn't wait. And sure enough, as they sailed up the Florida coast, a monster hurricane caught them. In just a matter of hours, 10 of the 11 ships were smashed to pieces on the reefs. The empire's entire financial rescue plan was now just scattered across the seabed. Now, the end of the Ming treasure fleet wasn't caused by a storm. It was brought down by a political power struggle back home. See, the voyages were championed by one faction, but a rival group of officials saw them as a huge, wasteful vanity project. After the emperor died, their view won out. The great ships were left to rot, and an official named Liu Daxia literally destroyed the records, calling the stories of the voyages deceitful exaggerations. He didn't just stop the future, he burned the past. But here's the thing. The story doesn't end when the ships go down. Oh no. The loss of the Spanish fleet didn't just end a mission. It accidentally kicked off the golden age of piracy. That wreck became a magnet for every outlaw and opportunist in the Caribbean. And this right here lays out the chain reaction perfectly. First, a fortune and treasure washes up on the Florida coast. This creates this massive new opportunity for all these privateers who were left jobless after the war. Then comes the first strike. A guy named Henry Jennings raids the Spanish salvage camps, stealing a ton of silver they'd already recovered. And finally, that stolen treasure becomes the seed money for a lawless pirate haven in Nassau, launching the careers of legends like Blackbeard.
So now let's contrast that chaos with what happened in China. The consequences there were a lot quieter, but you could argue they had a much bigger impact on world history. China didn't give birth to pirates. It gave birth to a power vacuum. By turning its back on the sea, China essentially scuttled its own future as a global maritime power. The bureaucracy destroyed the knowledge, let the greatest navy on earth just rot away, and moved all their resources inland. And what did that do? It created a huge power vacuum in the Indian Ocean. The very sea lanes that Zheng He had completely dominated were left wide open for the much, much smaller ships of the Portuguese and the Dutch, who would show up a few decades later. It's one of history's biggest what-ifs. So for centuries, both fleets were just gone. One resting under the waves, the other buried deep in imperial archives. But in their own ways, both are slowly being recovered, and they're offering us two very different kinds of treasure.
The Spanish fleet's legacy is tangible. You can actually hold it in your hand. Marine archaeologists are still pulling its treasure from the ocean floor. Things like these silver cobs, these crudely made coins from the New World, are the physical remnants of that disaster. Each one is a direct link to that doomed voyage, a silent witness to the storm that sank an empire's hopes.
But for Zheng He's fleet, there's no treasure chest to find. Its treasure was knowledge, and that knowledge was purposefully destroyed. So the recovery here is an intellectual one. Historians have to be detectives, piecing together the story from little fragments and foreign records, trying to reconstruct the memory of a fleet that was meant to be forgotten.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We can pull silver from the sand, sure. We can reassemble a ship's manifest. But how do you recover a future that a country deliberately threw away? Which loss is actually greater? The fleet that was destroyed by a storm, or the one that was destroyed by a pen, leaving the rest of us to forever wonder what might have been?